So I've got my reading glasses and my glass of water and my papers and my clicker. I'm just going to hope it all goes well. Okay. I just want to maybe start by saying that I am, in my work, I'm so fortunate to be have the experience of almost daily, certainly weekly, being so inspired and very humbled by witnessing the journeys that our clients take. So humbled, in fact, that I sort of feel a little bit not really up to the task. I'm happy to share what I want to share, but I'm just amazed, Louise and others of you in the room and others that are not here tonight. Thank you for giving those of us who work in this work the opportunity to learn for ourselves of how we would like to conduct ourselves. I only hope I would have half the courage and the strength that I see in our clients. We've been talking a lot about the body and about our breathing at the end and our swallowing and all of those things that are so important at the end of the journey. But I think it's also really important to recognize that even at the end of the journey, we are more than our bodies, than our breath, than our brains, and than our physical selves and our functioning. The process at that stage, I think, really forces us to focus on more the physical side of things. But I think it's really important as caregivers to stay, a little bit focused on some of the other things as well. So I'm going to go through some of the needs as dementia progresses, but I think it's important to recognize that these are certainly needs of people that have dementia and that are maybe moving towards the end stages of their disease, but they're also a list of very human needs. I think every one of us at some time in our lives has a need for all of these things, so that need to feel connected. And I think this only intensifies as people are beginning to really struggle to make sense of the world around them. Must be so frightening to feel less connection or to have things not make sense. So it really is important to help people to feel connected. To be respected and appreciated, not only for the person that they were and the life that they have lived, but also the person that they're continually attempting to be while they are still living. Because all of us, I'm sure, wish to live fully until the moment that we die. To feel loved. Of course, everybody wants to feel loved and that they're still a person of value. I know in the work that I do with people in the earlier stages of their illness, it's a real struggle when they start to feel that they can no longer contribute in a way that maybe they were used to doing. And this is a real struggle for people. So people want to feel that they still have some value, still have a contribution to make. So even simple signs of affection, I think, can be so powerful to reassure people. To be known and to be understood, and this also includes somebody's the loss of their abilities and their skills. People do lose abilities and skills, and they often struggle with that in themselves. But if they're known and if their strengths are noticed and recognized, and even in those later stages, that can be so powerful for people. Experiencing belonging and community. Again, I think this is important for any human being. Identity, their own unique value systems, those things don't go away just because someone is sick or is maybe losing their ability to express those things. To share, to love, to give. People do retain their ability to experience emotion very long into the disease process often. If you approach someone and reach out to shake their hand, often people, even in the very late stages, can reach up and respond or maybe smile or wave back if you wave to them. Those abilities are often intact right to the very end. To be compassionate, concerned, and accepting. I think it's really important for people to feel safe and secure and hopeful. My own we're working in this field, is that for many people, even from a fairly early stage, they start to feel quite a bit of anxiety. There's a lot of anxiety-based behaviors and feelings and so on that comes from this concern about what does the future hold for me. Certainly caregivers really feel that as well. So reassuring the person that they're safe, that you're in this with them, whatever the journey brings, because nobody knows that. Everybody has spoken to that in some way tonight, that nobody really knows what the future holds. It's a very individualized process for people. But if people can feel that reassurance, that's so important. To be productive, helpful, useful, and successful. I mean, obviously this becomes a challenge as the disease progresses, and perhaps this is more for when the person is still, relatively well, but they do still need to feel needed, and that they can still contribute to the lives of especially of their loved ones in some way. So change does happen in this disease process. It is a process, and for many people it can be a very lengthy process. It can go on for years. So you're encouraged to take a moment to reflect, on how, what changes have you seen thus far for those of you that are involved in caring for someone with dementia or Alzheimer's, what changes have you seen, and how are you impacted by those changes? How is your loved one impacted by those changes? I think it's important to develop a sense of self-awareness. So being aware of what exactly for you is challenging to you in this caregiving role that you've got. What impact is it having on you? And if you can be self-aware, then it helps you to recognize and seek out help when you need it. That's very easy to say. It's not very easy to do, I suspect, because when you're right in the throes of the experience, it's difficult to know. You don't know what you don't know. So that's a challenge. Important to recognize that help comes in different forms from different people or different sources. Is it emotional support you need? Is it help getting your finances sorted out, or your legal issues dealt with? Is it some spiritual care that you need? And sort of trying to just develop that sense of self-awareness and what are my needs now? What am I coping well with? Because I think most caregivers do experience times when they feel like they're coping fairly well with things. We're okay in that area, but this area here is an area that I'm really struggling with. So what that requires, it's easy to say that, but it really requires you to focus and maybe get that help from a social worker at the Alzheimer's Society, or a good friend, or your minister at the church, or whoever you seek support from. It does become harder to see the person, I think is fair to say. And again, I don't have any personal experience with this, but we do see our clients move through our services, and sometimes it's a little heartbreaking to see people move along in their journey, and the person that used to come down our hallways and make jokes with us and so on, we find out, oh, that person's had to go into live in long-term care now, or that person has passed away, so it does become harder to see that person. I think sometimes reminiscing with other people who love them too, and just enjoying the memories that you do have, as much as they're able to, enjoying those memories with them. For many people, long-term memory is something that remains intact for a very long time. So if you can get somebody talking about their happy memories, that can sustain you for a while. Giving and receiving is what we want in our relationships, and I often talk to either the spousal relationship or the parent-child relationship. They're a little bit different, but I think or if it's a friend or another family member, we're in relationships because we certainly expect and hope to give, but we also expect and hope to receive. And what happens with these diseases, I think, is that people lose the ability to hold up their end of the relationship. And that is challenging, and it's sad, and it's part of that grieving process for people as that relationship changes. So ambiguous loss, another concept here is anticipatory grief. So when a person is still physically present, but not present in the way that they used to be, and whether that's emotionally, intellectually, socially, or all of the above. And I think this is something that is perhaps not completely unique to Alzheimer's and dementia, but I think and my feeling is it kind of is, because I think these diseases, because they take people just little wee bits at a time. Louise mentioned that in her talk as well. If we just sort of compare in this chart, looking at loss and grief with a death. I'll just share that I lost my own father a year ago last August, so August 1st of 2016, my dad died, and it was a very profound and powerful experience that I'll never forget. Very positive in many ways. He became ill with cancer, and we had about a year and a half to say our goodbyes, and then he died. And when that happened, there were traditional rituals to say goodbye to my dad. We held a funeral. People sent us cards. There was an event that society recognized and marked. Announcements were made in the paper. People gathered for the funeral. If you compare that to this sort of ambiguous loss where the person is just slipping away ever so little bit at a time, there is no real closure, not until the person does actually pass away. It's not typically acknowledged, in our society, in our communities. It's a hard thing to acknowledge because they are still living. And sometimes I think people will say, well-meaning, well, at least they're still alive. I'm not sure how much comfort that actually brings, because they are, but they aren't in some ways if their disease is quite progressed. When there's an actual physical death of someone who's been ill and has died, there's a grieving process, and it's better understood and kind of straightforward. All of us die at some point. So everyone has had some experience with death, and if we haven't, we're going to. It's a societal thing. But with the ambiguous loss, it's a little bit more complicated, and it's hard to grieve someone who's still alive. With the loss and grief associated with a death, the relationship is retained. I just went back to Winnipeg, where I'm from, and visited my mother in the retirement home where she's living, and she has this portrait of my dad that was the portrait that we had at the funeral. It's this big, and it's hanging on her wall, and there he is, and that relationship. I even found myself talking to this picture on the wall when I was there visiting. But I think with dementia, it's just maybe more confusing, and it prevents somebody being able to move forward. Louise talked about that desire and that need to move on with her life, and I think sometimes there's even guilt associated with that. Often I think by the time the person with dementia actually passes away, the caregiver is so done with the grieving, and they're just so ready to move on, and that's not always very well accepted or very well understood by people who are not in that world and who don't necessarily get it. And the other point there, of course, is that depending on how the person passes away, in my dad's case it was about a year and a half, but for many people who go through this dementia journey, it can be a lot longer than that. It can be 10 years or more. So grief. Just really want to make the point that this is a hard topic to talk about. Interesting, Louise made reference to the learning series and her experience of wanting to sort of have all her ducks in a row. I'm going to go to this course and that course, but the care in the later stages, and we experience that. That is a tough sell. We only offer it twice a year because we offer the next steps 7 times a year because there's that much of an interest in it and a market for it. Care in the later stages, it's a tough sell. People don't want to recognize that they're there or that they are soon getting there and that they really need that information. So it's a hard thing to come to terms with. But of course, you have to come to terms with it. It's going to happen to you whether you are ready for it or not. So it's important, I think, to take time to acknowledge that you may have been grieving for a long time, right from day one or very soon after. You want to give yourself the time to grieve as things progress. There will be little losses, and I think sometimes these losses can sneak up on people. I've heard caregivers say, "Oh, okay, we've lost that," and looking back and sort of thinking, "Oh, okay, there was that was the first time I noticed that change or that change." These things can fluctuate too, because just because someone can't do a certain task or they've lost a certain thing in one moment, they might be able to come back to it a little bit later, but this is how it tends to happen with dementia. You may not always be able to attend to your usual routines or feel as energized or engaged as you would like to be. Caregiving is a very draining thing, especially as things progress. It's important to do what comes naturally to make you feel comforted. For some people, that's going for a run. For some people, it's having a bubble bath with a nice chocolate bar. So you've got to figure out what works for you. It's certainly not going for a run for me, I got to tell you. I don't run, not unless there's a fire drill or something. Whatever energizes you. Give yourself to feel whatever you may feel. I've already kind of alluded to this. You may not feel that sad. There may be lots of other feelings of relief, of finally being released from this role. There may be a sense of, I'm so glad that my husband or my wife is free from their suffering. This has been a very difficult journey for them, and I'm glad that it's over in that sense. You don't need to feel guilty about that, although sometimes that message is not very well received in society generally. So very important to be flexible about your expectations of yourself, your expectations of others. So important to care for yourself. And when I'm trying to sell this to our caregivers, I say, if you can't look after yourself for your own sake, look after yourself for the sake of your loved one, because if something happens to you, what's going to happen to that person? And I can't tell you the number of times that we've seen it's actually the caregiver who ends up having a stroke or a heart attack or some sort of a breakdown, and then the whole thing falls apart. So it really is so important to look after yourself as a caregiver. Keeping that sense of humor. I mean, these are serious topics. There's serious things that we're talking about, but humor can be found in all kinds of situations in life, and so wherever you can find that humor, it's important to do that. Really important to take breaks where you can. If you need to rally the support of family members or friends, whether it be support from public services or if you can pay privately for some respite care. Important to look at, to keep in mind the signs of stress, the physical and emotional signs of stress for yourself. Now, these are going to vary from one person to the next. Maybe you're getting a lot of headaches. Maybe you're not able to sleep at night. Maybe you're finding that you're crying at the drop of a hat. Whatever your signs are, these signs of stress are there for a reason. They're there to help you to recognize that I need to attend to this. There's something happening to me that I really need to attend to here. So very important to do that. Hard when you're so focused on someone else. And often, if there's other family members, your siblings, maybe your children, maybe the other parent that you're concerned about, it's really hard to. You've got a lot of people ahead of you on that list. You've got to put yourself a little higher on that list. And taking care of your own health. Again, watching your diet, your exercise, your sleep, all of those, going to your own doctor, making sure you're keeping check on your own health issues. Avoiding isolation. This is a tough one because by definition, this disease often creates social isolation as people become less able to cope with groups, with tasks that they maybe were used to. Maybe they sang in the choir and now they find they can't follow the music, or maybe they were the accountant for the soccer team, but now they can't do the numbers. It's just easier to stay home. Or maybe it's a little embarrassing to go out to restaurants now because my husband doesn't really know how to deal with a knife and a fork, so it's just easier to stay home. And after years of this, people find themselves really quite cut off from society and from social connection. So it's really important, as much as practical or possible, to try to maintain those social connections, either with your partner or your loved one, or just on your own. Also, following the death, this is one of the challenges to reconnect, because again, as a caregiver, you're sort of pulled away, and your time gets more and more consumed with the caregiving role. Maybe your sleep is disrupted. It just becomes easier to just stay home and focus on this one task. Becomes challenging to reconnect, but that's going to be so important, especially after the person has actually passed away, that you have some kind of connection, some kind of focus beyond the caregiving. There are support groups at the Alzheimer's Society, at McCormick Dementia Services, other agencies as well. So really important to get that support through support groups, through education sessions, talks like this, hopefully. And there is professional help available if if you're feeling that you're just completely overwhelmed with your feelings. So really important to seek those things out. I do want to talk to you about one little lady that I knew. She was referred to me for counseling around the amount of time that she was spending with her husband in the nursing home. Her husband was 92, she was 90. They'd been married for over 30 years, and there were lots of well-meaning people around them that were really concerned about how much time she was spending. She was really tiring herself out. In the early days, she was trying to actually bring him home on home visits, which was really a very risky activity. So I went in there and we got talking, and I guess maybe innocently at first I was focusing on my task of trying to convince this lady that she needs to not go, she should go to the day program herself, or she should go out for coffee with her friends or whatever. And after a few visits and some discussion, she said, I don't know how much longer I have with my husband, and I want to spend every minute that I have, that I can, while I can, with him, And I really learned from that lady, and I thought, you know what? Who are we, or who am I, or who is anyone to tell this lady how she can spend her time? And eventually, she was very reasonable. She did stop the home visits when it became clear that, even to her, that it was probably too risky. And she was there with him when he actually passed away. So she could carry on with her life feeling that she had done what she would want to do and what perhaps he wanted her to do. I don't know. But I really learned from her that, it's not for others to tell people how to go through this experience. You have the right to go through this experience as you choose. When you think about visiting, whether it be in the nursing home or at the hospital or wherever your loved one might be, I think it is important for you to prepare emotionally for visits, because sometimes, as I said earlier, when we're in relationship, we hope to receive as well as give. But if you are needing to go and see your mother and get motherly advice or motherly input or motherly support, chances are it may not be forthcoming. If it is, that's a bonus and that's great. But you need to be sort of emotionally and mentally prepared to go and perhaps not be well received, or have the person be worse off than you were expecting them to be, or that sort of thing. Our feelings generally flow from our thoughts. So if we prepare ourselves from a thought perspective, it can really help with how our feelings impact us. Making sure that you have sufficient time for a visit. I've sometimes heard people say, well, I had a lot of things on, I was rushing from one meeting to another, and I thought I would just pop in to see him, and it really didn't go well. And it's partly because the person wasn't able to focus, they didn't have the time that they needed to respond the way they would like to. And then trying to stay positive and upbeat no matter how you're feeling inside. We often say that people in the later stages of dementia will read from your emotions. So if you are stressed or anxious or angry or upset, you're more likely to get that back. So if you can present in a positive and upbeat way, that can be really helpful. I've just been given the 1 minute signal here, so I need to. Okay. Yeah, so you want to take advantage of the remaining abilities, things like music, touch, reminiscing of long-term memories that are often very intact. These things can soothe the person. You don't want to argue or reason with the person, and sometimes distraction can be helpful. I want to just get to my last couple of slides here, because this is, I think, a process and something that can be quite helpful as you're moving into the later stages. This is a life that's coming to a close. It's a life that you have valued tremendously. In most cases, I'm sure, a life that has made lots of contributions, many things to be proud of, many things to reflect on in a happy way. So you want to maybe celebrate that, mark that, with the people that love this person as well. So creating a collage of photographs from throughout the person's life, hosting a party in the person's honor, maybe even if they can come, right? Ask those close to the person to share their memories. Put a memory box of items of significance to the person together. And again, that might even be something that can be shared with the person themselves if they're still at a stage to be able to do that. Write a life story for the person that includes details about significant points in their life. The personal care book is one way to reflect on who the person is. This is a book that's available at the Society where you can sort of fill in specific things about the person. And write in a journal about your favorite memories of your time with the person. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.